By the time investigators realized how far the road stretched, the silence had already claimed a child. 9-year-old Melodee Buzzard, soft-spoken, gentle, and almost invisible to the world, vanished somewhere between the deserts of California, the red canyons of Utah, and the open plains of Nebraska. Her mother, Ashley, disguised them both in wigs, switched license plates, and drove more than 3,000 miles in a frantic, unraveling spiral, returning home without her daughter. What happened along that road remains a riddle stitched together by broken timelines, blurry security footage, and a mother's collapsing mind. Now, investigators race against time, piecing together a journey no one can fully explain, trying to answer the question echoing across the country. Where is Melodee? This is the story of a child hidden in plain sight, a mother fighting ghosts only she could see, and a road trip that became a haunting mystery. And with every passing day, the truth only grows darker. Before the search parties, before the press briefings, before anyone outside a small California town even knew a child was missing, there is a single image. A little girl, almost swallowed by an oversized hoodie, standing under the flickering lights of a lonely gas station on a cold Utah night. A cheap wig sits awkwardly on her head, turning her into someone she never wanted to be. She lifts her face toward the camera, just once. A fleeting glance. A whisper of a moment. Then she follows her mother into the darkness, and the door swings shut behind them. No one knew at that moment that they were witnessing the final confirmed sighting of 9-year-old Melodee Buzzard. A child who would soon become a question heavy enough to stop a nation. In the quiet neighborhoods of Vandenberg Village, where fog rolls in like a curtain every morning and the streets stay still long after sunset, life tends to feel predictable, familiar, safe. But even the safest towns hold shadows. Behind the blinds of a small house on Mars Avenue, a little girl grew up hidden from almost everyone. Not by chance, not by tragedy, but by choice, her mother's. Melodee was born with a gentleness that felt too soft for the world. She loved pastel drawings, glitter pens, and stories about places she'd never been allowed to see. Her voice was quiet, but her curiosity was boundless, a spark that flickered in the dark room she spent her life inside. Her world was small. Not because she wanted it that way, but because the person guiding her life kept shrinking it. Her mother, Ashley, carried a fractured past, one built from shelters, unstable homes, and a childhood spent navigating chaos she never understood. Trauma shaped her, molded her, tightened around her like a fist. And as she grew into adulthood, those fractures didn't fade. They widened. There were hospitalizations, moments of deep paranoia, a constant fear that someone, anyone, might try to take her daughter away. So she did what frightened people sometimes do. She isolated, she hid, and she hid her daughter with her. There were no school photos of Melodee taped to refrigerators. No birthday parties with cousins running through the yard. No afternoons at the park. No visits to grandparents. Her life left no footprints. Family members, desperate, confused, found themselves shut out. Calls went unanswered. Messages ignored. Doors unopened. They started to feel like ghosts orbiting a world they could no longer reach. California requires homeschooling parents to file teaching affidavits every year. Ashley filed none. 4 years, Melodee lived in a dimly lit bubble, a place where time blurred and the outside world felt as distant as a storybook planet. She existed, but only in the quietest corners of her mother's mind. And then, unexpectedly, something shifted. In August 2025, Ashley enrolled Melodee in a virtual school program. Suddenly, for the first time in years, this hidden child appeared on screens across the district. Her voice was soft, her demeanor shy, but behind her eyes was a brightness teachers couldn't ignore. They noticed the way she engaged with lessons, the hunger to learn, the spark of potential that felt impossible to overlook. But the moment she appeared, she disappeared. Absences piled up. Excuses grew thin. Something felt wrong. On October 14, 2025, deputies were sent to the home on Mars Avenue for what should have been a simple welfare check. The blinds were closed. The air felt heavy. And when the door opened, Ashley stood alone. Melodee was nowhere. Her mother offered confusion instead of answers. Fear instead of explanations. Fragments instead of clarity. Within minutes, deputies knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the beginning of something dark. Something stretched thin by time, secrecy, and unraveling sanity. Melodee Buzzard was officially declared missing. Behind the scenes, investigators began discovering the first strange pieces of a puzzle they didn't yet understand. Wigs, license plate changes, a sudden rental car, a frantic journey across state lines. but none of it formed a complete picture. Not yet. What they did understand, however, was this. A child who had spent her life hidden from the world had now become lost in it. Somewhere between California and the far edges of the Midwest, a fragile mother drove deeper into her own fears, carrying her daughter with her. And somewhere along that endless road, the world lost sight of Melodee. The night she vanished into those flickering gas station lights was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. The road does strange things to a fragile mind. When Ashley Buzzard pulled out of her driveway on Mars Avenue, the sun had barely risen. The neighborhood was still half asleep, unaware that a van carrying two shadows was slipping quietly into the morning haze. There were no goodbyes, no witnesses, no one standing on the lawn to watch the mother and daughter disappear. It was as if the world had turned its head at the exact moment everything began. The rental car she chose was nondescript, silver, forgettable, the kind of vehicle that could blend into any highway on the West Coast. Investigators would later find traces of its journey. Gas station receipts, toll records, and snapshots from security cameras scattered across hundreds of miles. But in the beginning, the road out of California felt calm, almost deceptive. Inside the car, Melodee sat quietly. Her small frame barely filled the seat. Her mother had placed another wig on her, tucking her natural curls beneath synthetic strands. A child disguised as someone else. A child who didn't understand why. Ashley drove with restless hands, tight on the wheel, constantly adjusting, constantly checking the rearview mirror as if something was following her. Something only she could see. The first hours of their trip left almost no trace. No stops. No brakes. Just asphalt rolling beneath them and a little girl staring out the window at passing scrublands she'd never seen before. To her, the world must have felt enormous. A vast, unfamiliar landscape she had only known through screens. But for Ashley, the world wasn't big. It was closing in. As the California border faded behind them, investigators believed something shifted. Her phone records showed bursts of activity, then long silences. GPS data jumped erratically, signals pinging in directions that didn't make sense. It wasn't clear whether she was running from something real, or running from something inside her. The first confirmed stop came hours later, just outside Las Vegas. A quick detour. A moment captured by a security camera mounted above a convenience store. Ashley stepped out of the rental car wearing a long blonde wig, sunglasses at night, and a restless expression that couldn't be hidden by cheap disguises. She moved quickly, scanning the parking lot like a hunted animal. In the passenger seat, Melodee waited, staring ahead. Not crying, not speaking, just watching her mother through the windshield. That quietness, investigators would later say, was the most haunting part of the footage. The stillness of a child accustomed to uncertainty. A child who had learned to silence herself long before anyone realized she was missing. They didn't stay long. A few minutes, a transaction, a bottle of water, a bag of snacks. Then the two shadows slipped back onto the interstate, swallowed by neon lights and desert night. From there, the journey became tangled. Receipts placed them briefly in St. George, Utah. The timestamp was late, long after most families had settled into bed. Another wig was purchased, a set of hair ties, child-sized shoes. But no one remembered seeing them together. No clerk noticed the little girl standing behind her mother. No traveler recalled crossing paths with them in the aisles. It was as if they moved through these spaces like ghosts. Hours later, the most chilling piece of evidence would emerge. The gas station video that captured Melodee for the final time. A few seconds of footage. A single frame that investigators replayed again and again, hoping the background might hold clues. But it didn't. Just flickering lights, a cold stretch of concrete, and a little girl's last glance toward a camera she never knew would become her voice. After the Utah stop, the trail became chaotic. The rental car pinged in Colorado. Then, inexplicably, Nebraska. 3,000 miles of erratic driving. Some of it overnight, some of it in long, unbroken stretches that no child should endure. It was a journey without direction, without rest, without logic. Investigators would later describe it as a spiral, the pattern of someone trying desperately to outrun a fear that lived inside their own head. Along those miles, no one could say for certain when Melodee disappeared. Did she fall asleep in the backseat and never wake up? Did something happen in a motel that left no record? Or did she vanish in the desolate stretches of highway where no camera watched and no witness stood by? Those answers lay hidden somewhere in the mother's fractured mind, buried beneath paranoia and years of untreated trauma. What investigators do know is this. Sometime during the return trip, the passenger seat became empty. When Ashley re-entered California, she was alone. She stopped at her home just long enough to change clothes, remove wigs, and take a shower. Then she walked into a local business, barefoot and disoriented, asking for help. She claimed she'd been kidnapped. She said someone had taken her daughter. She said things that contradicted themselves in the same breath. Her story unraveled in minutes. By the time deputies arrived, her rental car was found abandoned, cleaned out, wiped down, stripped of whatever truth it once carried. The seats told nothing. The trunk told nothing. There were no fingerprints from Melodee, no personal belongings, no signs that a child had been inside that vehicle for days. Ashley spoke in circles, drifting between clarity and confusion. She remembered some places, forgot others. Sometimes she claimed Melodee was safe. Other times she insisted something terrible had happened. But through it all, the one person who could not speak was the child at the center of it all. The more investigators pieced together the timeline, the more disturbing the gaps became. Long stretches with no transactions. Hours of missing GPS data. Entire nights with no digital footprint at all. That kind of silence can mean many things. None of them good. As detectives mapped the road trip on a massive wall inside the sheriff's office, red string connecting states like threads of a dark tapestry, the picture became clearer. This wasn't a getaway. This wasn't a plan. It was a breakdown, one that had taken a 9-year-old girl deeper into danger with every passing mile. And somewhere along the way, Melodee vanished. Whether she is still alive, hidden, waiting to be found, or whether the truth is far darker, that is the question that haunts every investigator on the case. The road she traveled is long, but the silence she left behind is longer. Thank you for staying with this story. Your time, your empathy, your presence, it means everything to the growth of this small but determined channel. Every like or comment helps carry Melodee's name further, making sure she isn't forgotten in the noise of the world. Now, as we move deeper into this mystery, one question rises like a shadow behind the investigation. What did detectives uncover inside the abandoned rental car that changed the direction of the entire case? The rental car sat in the impound lot like a sealed confession. Investigators approached it with quiet caution, the kind reserved for evidence that might hold answers no one is prepared to hear. The sun was low when they began, casting long shadows across the pavement, shadows that crawled over the silver hood, making the vehicle appear smaller, almost innocent. But innocence was never part of this story. Deputy Alvarez was the first to open the door. The moment the seal broke, a rush of stale air escaped, thick with the scent of fast food wrappers and exhaustion. The interior told a quiet story. Long hours of driving, restless nights, the frantic movements of someone unraveling in real time. In the back seat, a small indentation remained in the fabric, shallow but unmistakably shaped by a child's weight. Investigators paused when they saw it, none of them speaking the thought that crossed everyone's mind at the same time. If Melodee had been here, how far into the trip did that small impression still exist? Alvarez leaned in, scanning every surface. The car appeared clean. Too clean. The kind of clean that felt intentional. But people always leave something behind. In the center console, crumbs from a granola bar. On the dashboard, a faint smudge shaped like the palm of a small hand. On the floorboard near the passenger side, a single purple bead, round, glittering, the type that might fall from a child's bracelet. That bead would later become a focal point in the investigation. Not because it proved anything, but because it was the only trace of Melodee they could find inside the entire vehicle. No clothes, no backpack, no shoes, no snacks, no toys. Nothing that would suggest a child had lived in that car for days. Just one solitary bead. And as small as it was, it carried the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. Detectives continued their search with painstaking precision. They combed through every compartment, lifted every mat, inspected every seam. Crime scene technicians photographed everything. Every angle, every shadow, every speck of dust that might matter later. As they dug deeper, a clearer picture of Ashley's state of mind began to surface. In the trunk, they found 2 wigs crumpled into a corner, both with strands of Ashley's hair tangled inside. A half-used bottle of hair dye. A black hoodie. A receipt from a department store in Utah for a pack of makeup wipes and a child's t-shirt, size small. The strangest item was a folded sheet of notebook paper tucked beneath the spare tire. The ink was smeared, the writing frantic, uneven. They can see us. Everything is watching. Keep going. Keep going. The handwriting matched Ashley's. But it was the final line that chilled every investigator who read it. I have to protect her before they get her. No one knew who they were, or what Ashley believed was chasing them. But her fear was real. tangible. Heavy enough to drag her mind into a place where reality frayed at the edges. After hours of searching, Deputy Alvarez stepped away from the car, rubbing the back of his neck. He had been quiet most of the time, watching, thinking. Now he broke his silence. If she was trying to protect her, he said softly, why does it feel like she left her behind? The question hung in the air, suspended like dust caught in a beam of fading sunlight. There were still pieces missing. The mileage logged on the odometer didn't match the documented route. There were at least 600 unaccounted miles. That meant another detour, somewhere off-grid, somewhere remote, somewhere without surveillance. Somewhere a child could disappear without a single witness. A regional map was brought out, spread across a table inside the sheriff's office. Detectives traced the likely paths, red markers circling wilderness areas, abandoned rest stops, long-forgotten service roads running like scars through expanses of empty land. The more they studied the map, the more they realized that the truth might not be hidden in anything they found inside the car, but in the places the car had traveled. Meanwhile, Ashley sat in a hospital room under observation. She wore a blank expression, her eyes drifting toward the window as if something unseen waited just outside. At times she was lucid, answering questions with surprising clarity. Then, without warning, she would dissolve into terrified whispers, insisting someone was coming. She asked for her daughter repeatedly, then denied having one, then cried for her again. When investigators asked her where Melodee was, she stared at her hands for several minutes before answering. She's safe, she whispered. But her expression said otherwise. Her eyes flicked downward, unfocused. Her fingers trembled. Her breathing quickened. She's safe, I think. That uncertainty, those last two words, sent chills through every detective in the room. They pressed further. They asked where the last place was that she remembered seeing her daughter. Ashley looked up slowly, her gaze distant, unfixed. A place with trees, she murmured. A lot of trees. I can't remember the name. That described half a dozen states. It described thousands of miles. When she was asked why she had driven so far, she leaned back, exhausted, her voice barely audible. They were following us. They knew everything. They could hear everything. She swallowed hard. I had to keep her away. I had to keep her hidden. I had to do something. A tear slid down her face. But I got too tired. Those 4 words changed everything. Because investigators realized then that whatever happened to Melodee, it might have happened because her mother reached her breaking point. Back in the impound lot, the sun dipped below the horizon. The silver rental car was tagged, logged, sealed. The purple bead from the floorboard was placed into evidence. And as the techs packed their equipment, the entire investigation shifted from a search for a missing child to a search for a location. Somewhere along that long, winding route, through deserts, plains, mountains, forests, there was a place where a mother's fear finally overtook her ability to hold on. A place where a 9-year-old girl's journey ended. A place that has not yet been found. Thank you for being here, for caring enough to follow this story and keep Melodee's name alive. Your presence helps this small channel grow and ensures her story continues to reach those who might help bring answers. As we continue, one question rises from the edges of the investigation. What did Ashley reveal during her psychological evaluation that forced detectives to reconsider everything they believed about the case? The truth rarely appears all at once. It comes in flashes, small pieces of light cutting through a long stretch of darkness. And by the time investigators began piecing together what truly happened to Melodee, that darkness was already trembling, thinning, preparing to break. But no one expected how the first crack would appear. It started with a whisper. A neighbor, a woman in her late 60s who had lived alone for years, stepped forward after watching the news. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't make any accusations. She simply said she'd seen something she hadn't understood at the time. Something that now kept replaying in her mind every time she closed her eyes. She remembered hearing a scream. Not the playful shriek of a child in the yard. Not the startled gasp of someone who tripped. The scream was sharp, short, cut off too quickly. A sound that stayed in the air long after it ended. But she had dismissed it, told herself it was nothing. Told herself children sometimes cried even loudly. She didn't want to admit, until now, that the scream had come from the direction of Melodee's home. Investigators listened carefully. They didn't judge her. They didn't rush her. They simply asked her to describe the sound again, and the woman did, trembling at the memory. It was the first new detail in days, but it wasn't enough to build anything solid. Still, truth doesn't need much. Just a crack. just a whisper. And suddenly, a pattern began to form. Another neighbor admitted something else. He had seen a light flick on in the middle of the night, long after the house should have been sleeping. He had heard footsteps, fast ones, crossing the wooden porch. At the time, he assumed it was the parents checking on something outside, but now he wasn't so sure. The cracks widened. Investigators took these small details and held them against the timeline they'd built. Something wasn't matching. Something was off by entire minutes that now felt like missing pieces of the puzzle. And that's when they finally did what they had been avoiding for too long. They returned to the house. This time they searched deeper. Not just the surface. Not just the rooms that were clean and camera-ready. They searched the corners, the crawl spaces, the forgotten places where dust gathered and secrets hid quietly. They moved slowly, methodically, peeling back layers of the family's life. Inside Melodee's room, they noticed the drawings. Not the usual colorful scribbles you'd expect from a child her age. These were different. Some were bright and happy, sunshine, butterflies, rainbows. But others held shadows. Figures drawn without faces. A house sketched with thick black windows. A small girl drawn over and over again with a circle around her chest, like she was trying to say something she didn't have the words to explain. Detectives exchanged looks. These drawings weren't proof of anything, but they were signs, signals. A child's silent attempt to translate fear into something she could put on paper. Then came the discovery that locked the room into silence. A small piece of fabric, tucked under the corner of the bed frame, torn, out of place. The color didn't match any of Melodee's clothes. It looked newer and wrong. They bagged it carefully, hoping it would become the thread that unraveled the truth. But the moment that truly shifted the investigation didn't happen inside the house. It happened in the backyard. A young officer, barely a year into the job, noticed something about the ground near the old storage shed. The soil looked disturbed, not freshly dug, but moved recently enough to stand out against the rest of the yard. A subtle difference. The kind most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking for it. He called it in. Investigators approached slowly. No shovels, no rushing. They simply examined the soil, the footprints, the faint drag marks leading toward the shed door. Something had been moved. Something had been hidden. They pried the door open. Inside, the air was heavy. Dust floated in the beam of the flashlight like tiny ghosts waking from sleep. Boxes surrounded the walls. Old decorations, tools, forgotten items from years past. But in the center, near the back, something didn't belong. A tarp. Folded. Placed carefully beneath a stack of old newspapers. The lead investigator lifted it with gloved hands. The weight. The smell. The chilling recognition. It wasn't Melodee. But it was enough to confirm one terrifying truth. Someone inside that house had been hiding something long before the night Melodee disappeared. Background checks were pulled again. Interviews were repeated. Pressure increased. Every family member was questioned and every answer was dissected. Tension rippled through the small town like electricity. Whispers turning into rumors, rumors turning into fear. People began locking their doors earlier. Children stayed indoors. Parents watched each other with suspicion. Even friends avoided eye contact at the grocery store. Because now the question hanging in the air was heavier than ever. If someone in that house could hide this, what else were they capable of hiding? The investigation began shifting toward one individual. Someone whose timeline didn't add up. Someone whose behavior had changed drastically in the days following Melodee's disappearance. Someone who had suddenly stopped cooperating after realizing the police had returned to the house. They had their suspicion. But suspicion means nothing without truth. And truth needed evidence, hard, undeniable, devastating evidence. And when investigators finally found it, it didn't come from the house. It didn't come from the neighbors. It didn't come from footprints or drawings or torn fabric. It came from a device that recorded everything. A silent witness hiding in plain sight. A witness that had never lied. And when they pressed play, the room froze. The first real piece of undeniable truth had finally surfaced. And it was worse than anyone imagined. The darkness was no longer cracking, it was shattering. Before I continue, thank you for listening with such patience and heart. Your support is helping this new channel grow one listener at a time, and I'm grateful for every moment you spend here. If you haven't already, joining by liking, commenting, and subscribing helps more than you know. And now, we move toward the next part of the story, where the recording reveals something no one was prepared to face. Would you dare listen to what the camera saw? The room was quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your chest and refuses to let go. Outside, the wind stirred the last leaves of autumn across Vandenberg village, a muted echo of the journey that had unfolded over thousands of miles. Melodee Buzzard was still missing. But the investigation had revealed pieces of her story, fragments of a life caught in a storm not of her making. And in those fragments, there was a reflection of a truth that no headline could capture. She was a child who had known love, fear, isolation, and bravery in ways that few can imagine. Her mother, Ashley, had lived in a world of shadows and paranoia. She had created a bubble to protect her daughter, a bubble that ultimately became a cage. And yet, even in that cage, the spark of Melodee's life shone through. In the drawing she left behind, the small gestures captured on surveillance footage, and the beads she carried along the journey, she had left signs of her presence, reminders that a child's spirit is resilient even under the heaviest weight. Family members spoke in quiet tones, each word carrying the weight of months of anxiety and heartbreak. Lily Deans, her grandmother, had baked cookies that went uneaten, held photographs that never left her side, and whispered stories of a little girl whose laughter she could almost hear if she closed her eyes. Jessica Shade, the aunt, told investigators of the love she had for Melodee, the joy she imagined for her future, and the relentless hope that she would one day be safe. Even Lori Miranda, Ashley's mother, the woman who had experienced hardship and loss herself, found a way to speak to the child she had never abandoned in spirit. "We are looking for you, sweetheart. We will not give up." This chapter of the story was not one of resolution. It was a chapter of reflection, of understanding how fragile life can be when fear overrides reason, and love becomes entwined with isolation. It was also a lesson, a reminder that children, no matter how hidden, deserve visibility, protection, and voices that speak for them when they cannot. The investigation offered clues to the public, a map of what had happened, and a narrative of events that spiraled into chaos. But more importantly, it left a question that hung in the air like fog over the hills of Santa Barbara. How many children in the quiet homes around us are living unseen, unheard, or isolated by fear disguised as protection? It was a question with no easy answer. And yet, it compelled the heart to look closer, to listen more intently, to reach out when something feels off. Melodee's story was not just her own, it was a reflection of the countless small voices that struggle to be seen in the world. The lesson etched into this case is simple, yet profound. Vigilance, empathy, and action can save lives. Awareness of the hidden struggles in children's lives is not a burden, it is a responsibility. And hope, even when fragile, is the most powerful force of all. It is the thread that connects communities, investigators, and families in the pursuit of justice. In the shadows of this story, one truth remains. Melodee is not just a case number. She is a child who deserves to be remembered, whose story must echo beyond the headlines, and whose spirit reminds us all to care, to notice, and to act. And so we leave this part of her journey with a tribute, a moment to honor her life, her courage, and the love that surrounds her. In every drawing, every footprint, every whisper of hope, she exists. She is resilience. She is light. She is a call to humanity to never ignore the silent cries of a child. Thank you for listening, for keeping Melodee's story alive, and for holding space for those who cannot speak for themselves. Your time, attention, and compassion help this channel grow, helping us shine light on the stories that deserve to be told. Every like, every comment, every subscription is a step toward ensuring no child is forgotten. As we step away from this story for now, ask yourself, how far would you go to protect the innocent, and would you recognize them if they were right in front of you, hidden in plain sight? The story of Melodee Buzzard is far from over in the hearts of those who care. Let her courage inspire action, reflection, and a relentless search for justice.